The Boston Celtics, just 2 years ago, the Boston Celtics were in the NBA Finals. Last year, they almost overcome a 3-0 deficit to the Miami Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals. And then this year, their team is going to be looking drastically different. Is this finally the team that's going to overcome the odds and rise to the top and win the NBA championship? First, let's talk about this offseason. Obviously, the Celtics made some big trades this offseason. Well, a big trade. They send Danilo Gallinari, Mike Muscala to the Wizards. They send Marcus Smart to the Grizzlies. And they get Kristaps Porzingis in exchange. And then through free agency, they lose Grant Williams, who goes to the Dallas Mavericks. So overall, the Boston Celtics gain Kristaps Porzingis, they lose Grant Williams, they lose Marcus Smart, they lose Danilo Gallinari, and they lose Mike Muscala. And they lose Blake Griffin, but there are reports that he's going to re-sign with the Celtics, so I'm not really going to go over that. So the real question is, was this trade worth it? Was losing those players? And to be fair, Grant Williams wasn't a part of the deal. They just lost him due to free agency and signing. They didn't want to pay him as much as the Dallas Mavericks were going to pay him. But losing those players, it's all encompassed. Was it worth it to gain Kristaps Porzingis? I mean, you lose Marcus Smart, who just 2 years ago was Defensive Player of the Year. Mike Muscala, he's solid off the bench. I mean, he didn't get many minutes for the Celtics, so I don't think they're worrying about it too much. Danilo Gallinari was injured the whole year, so he didn't play at all, but he can be solid off the bench as well. So in reality, the trade is Porzingis for Smart. And initially when this trade happened, I hated it. It made no sense to me why the Boston Celtics would trade their glue guy, their guy who's like a team leader, their best defender on the perimeter, like bare none. He's the best defender on the perimeter, and he can handle himself down low, and he's a smaller guy. And he's a point guard. He can bring the ball up, and he can shoot. And you trade him. You trade your glue guy for Kristaps Porzingis. So like I said initially, the trade made no sense to me. I thought the Grizzlies had an absolute steal. I mean, to be fair, I think the Grizzlies, this was an amazing trade for them. They have the past two defensive players of the year in Jaren Jackson Jr. and Marcus Smart. But the Celtics, I was like, you're really going to trade away a defensive guy for Kristaps Porzingis, who's inconsistent. He's injury-ridden. I mean, he can shoot, but he's not like Marcus Smart because you have some big guys already. But as this offseason has gone further on, and I've had time to have this trade marinate in my mind, I've come to the conclusion that it's a good trade. I'm not saying it's an amazing trade or it's like some blockbuster trade. I think it's a good trade for the Boston Celtics. Now just hear me out. You have Marcus Smart. He's primarily the Boston Celtics point guard and their main defensive guy. But Derek White, last year in the playoffs specifically, and just in the year in general, he was looking very good. So obviously Marcus Smart's still better than Derek White. But you have a guy in Derek White that can do a lot of the same things that Marcus Smart can do. And Derek White has a lot more potential on offense than Marcus Smart does. Marcus Smart's going to be a better defender. But Derek White has that offensive versatility. And you also have Malcolm Brogdon. So you have two guard-type players. And if you have Marcus Smart, that's three. So, it's a little overbearing at the guard position. And Kristaps Porzingis, he's a center. I mean, you have Al Horford. You have Robert Williams. But who else do the Boston Celtics have at the big? And Kristaps Porzingis, he's going to stretch the floor for you. Robert Williams can't do that. I don't know how their starting lineup is going to look. But, I mean, if you don't want to start Derek White or Malcolm Brogdon, you could have Kristaps Porzingis, Al Horford, and Robert Williams on the floor. I doubt they'll do that because that's just going to be too big of a team. I mean, they'll probably get blown past on defense. There's going to be mismatches sometimes. But, I mean, Al Horford's a good defender. Robert Williams is. a defensive player of the year type defender. He's an amazing shot blocker. Kristaps Porzingis, I mean, he's an all right defender. He averages about 1.5 blocks per game, 1 steal per game. But last year on the Wizards, he averaged 23 points per game. Now, mind you, that is on the Wizards. And he's getting about 33 minutes per game. He's not going to get that type of freedom that he did on the Wizards last year that he is going to get on the Boston Celtics, that's for sure. Because you have Jayson Tatum, you have Jaylen Brown, you have these other players who are going to go get you buckets, and Kristaps Porzingis is not going to be asked to do much. So my point overall is that I don't think getting rid of Marcus Smart changes the Boston Celtics dynamic that much. Like, yeah, Marcus Smart's an amazing player, but I mean, you have Derek White, who can do similar stuff to Marcus Smart, better on offense, a little worse on defense. And then you have Malcolm Brogdon, who can be a 6th man of the year at any given year. And their defensive rating last year was 3rd. So, I mean, they're going to take a little hit in the defense category, but their offense is just going to be even more efficient than it was last year. And they were 2nd in offensive rating last year. So they could move up to like 1. I don't think having Marcus Smart be gone, especially when you have Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, who are great defenders. I mean, Jayson Tatum is an amazing defender. He can hold his own. Robert Williams can hold his own. Al Horford can hold his own down low. Derek White can hold his own. We're going to have to see about Kristaps. But I don't think that getting rid of Marcus Smart is as big of a deal as some people are making it out to be. Because Kristaps Porzingis, he's going to give you buckets on offense. And he'll be a solid defender down low. My only gripe with this trade and just change in roster overall is that they were 2nd in offense, 3rd in defense. They could have easily won the finals last year if they made it. They just got, I don't know what happened to them in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Heat. They almost came back from down 3-0. So, I mean, they were a good enough team to beat the Heat. The Heat were just on a roll last year, I mean, during the playoffs, besides like the finals. They were just too hot. But I think that their team last year could have definitely won. But I guess if you have a team that has championship aspirations, they don't do it 2 years in a row, there's got to be something you got to do to at least change the morale of the team, change the chemistry a little bit, tighten things up. And I think that's what they did with the Kristaps Porzingis trade. I mean, yeah, they did lose some of those other guys. But, I mean, they also signed a couple good guys. They drafted Jordan Walsh, who is like a Draymond-type player. They signed O'Shea Brissett. They signed Danilo Banton. Those guys are solid off the bench. Danilo Banton was great for the Raptors last year. I mean, he's just a glue guy. O'Shea Brissett can give you buckets on offense. So even like the departure of Mike Muscala and those like other players like Grant Williams might be a little bit of a hit. I mean, he got some flack for what he did last year in the Eastern Conference Finals, but he's a good player for the Celtics. Like he holds his own on defense. He's a decent 3-point shooter. He's only gotten better as each year's gone on. So that's going to be a little bit of a hit. But, I mean, they got other guys. This team is still a championship talent team, for sure. I know I went over some of the other players a little bit, but let's talk about the roster a little bit more. First, let's talk about the guy who just got paid the biggest contract in NBA history, Jaylen Brown. All-Star last year. An all-star in 2020-21 season. He averaged almost 27 points last year, 3.5 assists, 7 rebounds. It was his best year statistically in every single category. So I'm not surprised at all that he got paid big. I mean, I don't know if Jaylen Brown should be the highest paid player in the NBA, but I mean, that's how contracts work in the NBA. It's just a little weird. You have to give him a max contract because if you don't, he's just going to go somewhere else that will pay him a max contract. So keeping him and Jayson Tatum was a very smart move for the Boston Celtics. I love seeing that. And, I mean, he's just gotten better every single year he's been in the NBA. He just gets more comfortable and more comfortable. The aspects he can improve, defense for sure. Maybe a little bit more of a facilitator, but he does everything. I mean, he's a very good rebounding forward. One of the best shot creators in the NBA. He can give you a bucket without a play. Like, he can just ISO and score a lot. So I have no worries for Jaylen Brown for next season. And then you have the best player on the Celtics. You know, you got the 19-year-old Jayson Tatum, still in his rookie year. It's unbelievable. No, I'm just kidding. But he averaged 30 points per game last year. If Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid didn't exist, Jayson Tatum probably would have been MVP. But they do exist, so he wasn't. But he averaged 30 points per game last year on one of the best Eastern Conference teams in the NBA. He averaged 9 rebounds per game and 5 assists. He did everything Jaylen Brown did, but better. Which is crazy because they're both like heavy ISO players. Yet Jayson Tatum is, I would say, better on defense as well. I would say that Jayson Tatum is basically just Jaylen Brown, just a smidge better. Which a smidge better in the NBA can do a lot for you. But Jayson Tatum, I wouldn't be surprised if he had MVP aspirations next year. I would not be surprised at all. I mean, we all know he grinds in the offseason. He has gone up in points every single year as well, along with Jaylen Brown. He went from a 27-point per game score to a 30. He had a 3-point jump last year. If he can go higher than 30 points per game, if he can get to like 32, I mean, he's going to be MVP. Especially since they can easily be the number 1 team in the East. Easily. And I probably should have talked about Al Horford when I was talking about Kristaps, because they most likely got Kristaps for the Al Horford position. I mean, Al Horford's just getting old. It's just the facts. I mean, he's going to be turning 37 this year. He has gone down in points per game for the past, 5 years. His efficiency's been going down. Basically everything that he's done has been going down. His rebounding, his assists, his shot blocking, everything. He's less than a 10-point per game scorer now. Last year was his first year ever in the NBA where he was less than a 10 points per game scorer. So, I mean, he can still give you buckets. He's still going to be a guy who you can lean on. But getting Kristaps was definitely an upgrade for that position that Al has been doing. And if Al comes off the bench, he hasn't come off the bench in a very long time. For the past 7 years, 8 years. But if he does, that's going to be a great guy for the Celtics to have come off the bench. Speaking of guys who come off the bench, you got Malcolm Brogdon, who was 6th man of the year last year. It was Malcolm Brogdon's worst year that he's had. I mean, it stems from the fact that he didn't start any of the games. But off the bench, he's giving you 15, 4, and 4. 15, 4, and 4, that's amazing off the bench. And if he's going to have a better weapon in Al Horford, I don't know if that's a better weapon than Grant Williams, but he's still going to have some weapons. He's going to have O'Shea Brissett now. So Malcolm Brogdon's going to be huge off the bench. Robert Williams, who is going to be their starting center, I would guess. Last year Robert Williams wasn't even that healthy, and he still was playing decent. He only played 35 games, started 20 of them. He's going to be much more comfortable this year. He's been a little injury-ridden his whole career. He played a pretty full season in 21-22 season, but other than that, he hasn't played very much. He averaged 8 points per game. He averaged 1.4 blocks, 8.3 rebounds. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say he's going to average a double-double next year. He's still a young guy. He's going to be turning 26. I think he's only going to improve. And that's going to be huge for the Boston Celtics if he can get his rebounding and shot blocking numbers up, which we know he can because he can give you 5 blocks on any given night. He was on the all-defensive team 2 years ago. So why not do it this year, It's time to finally talk about Joe Mazzulla. He was 3rd in Coach of the Year voting during the regular season. Led the Celtics to 2nd in the East, just below the Milwaukee Bucks. Everybody was a little bit worried because it didn't seem like he was going to be a good fit for the playoffs because I don't know if you want to call it choke against the Heat. I mean, he almost came back from a 3-0. Like, what else do you want from him? He got them to a Game 7. It just wasn't in the cards. It was his first year coaching, and he's like the youngest coach in the NBA. So it doesn't really make sense to me. I don't understand the hate for Coach Mazzulla. I think he's a great coach. I think he's only going to get better. He's learned a lot in his first year. He knows what is expected of him now. He knows how his team should operate in the playoffs. He knows what kind of changes he needs to have from regular season to playoffs. So I think Coach Mazzulla is going to be fine. And if there's one thing that can get the Celtics over the hump, it's not going to be Kristaps Porzingis or Marcus Smart in that trade. It's not going to be that. If anything can get them over the hump, it's going to be a great coach. And I think Joe Mazzulla can definitely do that. I mean, time will tell, obviously. But if you got a great coach, you can take your team far. Like if the Boston Celtics had Greg Popovich, they're winning the chip. They're winning the chip almost every year. But they don't. So they got Joe Mazzulla. And last year was his first year, and then he made it to the Eastern Conference Finals. For me, that's a success. I mean, everybody calls it a disappointment because they lost to the Heat. But the Heat beat the Milwaukee Bucks, the number 1 seed. So, I mean, if that's a disappointment, then the other one's got to be even a bigger disappointment. If anything, it's not a disappointment for any teams. It's just good for the Miami Heat. It's just like a great season for the Miami Heat. It's not really a disappointment for the Boston Celtics. But this year, there's going to be more expectations. So if Mazzulla doesn't get them to the finals, he might be gone. I don't think he should be judged on like 2 years. Unless you can like hire a winning coach that like gets fired somehow next year. Like like Mike D'Antoni. I don't know. But I think people are being a little too harsh on Joe Mazzulla. I think he can get them to where they need to be. And I think they're just going to be better overall this season. So if I were to predict where the Boston Celtics are going to end up at the end of the year next year, I'm going to say that they're going to be the number 1 seed. And I think they're going to be the number 1 seed by a couple games. I think like the Bucks and the Sixers are going to be behind them a little bit. But I have no doubt that the Celtics will be the number 1 seed. And I think that they're going to go to the NBA Finals. I'm just saying that right now. Maybe in a couple months I'm going to have a different opinion. But right now, the Celtics are my favorite in the East. I mean, they just have too much talent. Like Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown could be all NBA first-team players in a given year, the same year. And then you got Kristaps Porzingis now, who's going to be efficient on offense, most like hopefully. I mean, he can be sporadic at times with how consistent he is. But I think that their team, I don't know if I would say improved a whole lot. I think it's pretty much the same, but different. It's like the same amount of talent, but a little different in how their team's going to operate. I think they're going to be a little less defensive-oriented and a little more offensive-oriented this year. But I think that they're going to have a great season. I think they'll make the finals. I have them probably third in my ranking for if they will win the finals. I think the Suns and the Nuggets are a little bit ahead of them. I just think the West is a little bit better. But Celtics are going to have a great year.